Marvel Rivals versus Overwatch. This has been a theme of my timeline since Marvel Rivals came out, and not surprising, people are trying to figure out and discuss which game is better, or whether or not it's just down to a personal preference. So, to answer this question, we have to look at 5 different categories to determine which one is better than the other. So, starting with category number 1, optimization and overall performance. No surprising here, this one belongs to Overwatch. Overwatch being a game of 8 years, they've had plenty of time to refine the game and polish up the experience, where Marvel Rivals is brand new and only really about 2 months old. So for comparisons, Overwatch to max settings, I can get 200 FPS average. Whereas Marvel Rivals maximum settings, I'm getting about 70 to 80 FPS max. So these games are both more or less equivalent in terms of visual fidelity and what's happening on screen, with the only difference being that Marvel Rivals doesn't have static maps. The maps do change with destruction and things of that nature, but overall the optimization is not very good in comparison. Plus, I've experienced multiple crashes on Marvel Rivals, something that hasn't happened to me in Overwatch since ever. So in my opinion, when it comes to this category of optimization and polish, Overwatch takes the category here, but that's to be expected because of the game's age. Going into the second category. The second category is overall game mechanics and how the game feels. This is not to be confused with fun factor and how fun a game is. This is about how the game feels mechanically. And with that, I still think Overwatch takes the cake here. And the reason for that is if you take a character from Overwatch and then compare them to their Marvel Rivals counterpart, you can really see the difference in terms of how it feels mechanically. For example, if you compare Soldier 76's assault rifle to Punisher's assault rifle, shooting Soldier 76's gun feels way better than shooting Punisher's gun. It feels punchier, it feels like it has more weight, but the key thing is the feedback that the game gives you. It feels better to shoot things in Overwatch than it does in Marvel Rivals. This even applies to other characters such as Black Widow versus Widowmaker, and even melee characters such as Brigitte, where Brigitte's flail feels better to swing around and hit people than does Thor's hammer. It's just how mechanically the game feels, and this even applies to the movement. Overwatch's movement feels smooth, feels precise, where at times Marvel Rivals can be a little clunky from time to time. So overall, when it comes to mechanics, once again, Overwatch takes the cake here. Moving on to number 3, something that I touched on in number 2, fun factor. Now, unlike mechanics, this isn't about how precise or how everything feels. This is about whether or not, when you're playing the game, which game are you having more fun in. Now, generally speaking, for most people, that's going to be Marvel Rivals, because Marvel Rivals leans into that hero fantasy and tries to make every character feel overpowered, even if they're not. Case in point, Magic is a character that is known to be good by most accounts. By most people, they'll say, oh, she's good, but not overpowered. Yet the people that know how to master that character and pop off of that character feel unstoppable, like nothing can stop them, and they're just mowing through enemies one at a time, right? The character feels good. I'm a Moon Knight player. I play a lot of Moon Knight. Moon Knight is far from overpowered, and yet when I pop off with Moon Knight, again, I feel like I'm overpowered, even though I'm not. And that's because of the way the direction of the balance is and how the game leans into the hero fantasy. Overwatch, that game's balance philosophy is for competitive esports. So while the game does a better job of giving you a sports-like atmosphere, that sacrifices fun factor. And the only real people who will sit there and say Overwatch is more fun than Marvel Rivals is the people who are probably more in tune with their competitive side, where they want a competitive experience, right? More people will sit there and say Call of Duty is more fun than Counter-Strike. But the people who say Counter-Strike is more fun are the people who enjoy that competitive atmosphere, whereas people who enjoy Call of Duty is more casual. It's kind of like that, right? Marvel Rivals Obviously, having the Marvel IP does wonders for the casual audience and the lore that people have and the love that people have for the characters. But the game is just catered towards the casual audience and makes everything feel like they're overpowered. And when you feel like you're overpowered, it's more fun. So, in general, in my opinion, Marvel Rivals, even though Overwatch is the better game mechanically, Marvel Rivals is just a more fun game to play because the hero experience just feels so good and it feels like you're overpowered regardless of who you're using. Moving on to number 4, game direction. Game direction here is the one, in my opinion, it goes to Marvel Rivals. It's no secret that from Overwatch's standpoint, considering the amount of reworks they've had of characters, the moving to 5v5, now testing 6v6, and leaving the possibility open for a return for 6v6, it clearly shows that they don't know what direction to take that game. They don't know whether they want that game to be a first-person shooter game or if they want it to be more of a MOBA game. Because regardless of which way they go, they lean more to one side, community complains, they switch. Then once they switch, the community complains again, and then they go back. It's like, pick a lane. Do you want to be more on the MOBA side or do you want to be more on the shooter side? Pick a lane. Are you going to be 6v6 or are you going to be 5v5? Pick a lane. Like, that lack of direction is very frustrating from a community standpoint, from a player standpoint, where Marvel Rivals knows what it wants to be. It wants to be a 6v6 hero shooter. And it's very simple as that. Because the game is in third person, it doesn't take itself as seriously as Overwatch does. And in general, they just lean into everything about the game being fun first and foremost, and everybody knows it. You know, it's obvious where they're going, and the community can see where they're going. And when the community can see where they're going with the game, it's easier to enjoy the game. It's easier to support the game because you know where they're going. Where Overwatch, it's like, you know what? I'm a Sombra main. She's been reworked twice. Symmetra mains had reworks like 3 times. Doomfist players. Doomfist started as a DPS. Now he's a tank. So, like, your favorite characters could be one way, a certain way, and that's the way you fell in love with them. And then they could change the character to the point where they lose their identity. And now that's not the character you fell in love with anymore. And that frustration of the direction of the game, plus all the betrayals when it comes to lying to the community, backstabbing to the community, all of these things add up where, in terms of the game direction, Marvel Rivals is the clear-cut winner, and this is something that a lot of people appreciate. Moving on to the final aspect, support and monetization. It's no secret that Overwatch has become a greed fest for monetization. While people will say skin prices are similar, it's not. It is obvious to see that Marvel Rivals skin prices are not only cheaper, but in general provide better value. And to top it all off, they currently only have really one type of currency. Yes, they have lattice and yes, they have units, but it's a 1-to-1 ratio. Whereas Overwatch, you have your Overwatch coins and then you have your mythic prisms. And so if you want to buy a mythic skin, you need mythic prisms. Battle Pass only gives you enough for one mythic item to level up completely. It's just when you bundle it all together, it's just monetization after monetization. And when you look at the fact that Marvel Rivals is cheaper, it really, really, really favors Marvel Rivals on this side. Then you take that and you combine it with the fact of support. Overwatch releases a new hero every other season and a map in the off season. Whereas Marvel Rivals is planning on doing 2 heroes a season. Season 1 is an outlier with the 4, but they're planning on 2 heroes a season. Now I know people will sit there and say, wait a minute, Blizzard has to make the characters from scratch. Marvel Rivals uses the IP and it's just easier. Correct. It is easier. But from a community standpoint, we're getting updates more frequently with Marvel Rivals than we do with Blizzard and Overwatch. That's just the way it is. So when you break it down, the final score is 3-2 for Marvel Rivals, where the only 2 categories that Overwatch wins is in polish and mechanics, 2 things that they have they have a huge advantage of because of how long the game's been out, that this was an actual expectation. But when it comes to fun factor, game direction, the support the game is getting, the monetization practices, then you take that, throw in the Marvel IP, and throw in the fact that NetEase has yet to betray the trust of its players, where Blizzard has betrayed the trust of their players multiple times. It is obvious to sit here and say, you know what? Unless you are a dedicated hardcore Overwatch fan, or you're just a fan of a more competitive, serious environment, Marvel Rivals is the better game in general. Overall, it is the better game for casuals. It is the better game for fans of Marvel. Me personally, I love Overwatch, but I also love Marvel. And if you sit there and say, hey, you can only play one game for the rest of your life, Overwatch or Marvel Rivals, I'm leaning towards Marvel Rivals just because the game in general is more fun. They have not betrayed my trust, and they support the game at a much better rate than Blizzard does with Marvel Rivals. So overall, in my opinion, Marvel Rivals is the better game in general for most people, and I think that long term, both games will be around, but I think long term, Marvel Rivals will be the more popular game in the end. This is Veteran Gamer, and I hope to see you guys next time.